Welcome to the A.R. Bernard Show. We've got two very special guests today. Joe Battaglia, an accomplished faith-based author and broadcaster, will be joining us. But first, DEI, an acronym for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. It's become a hot topic in the presidential election, including when former President Donald Trump was asked at the National Association of Black Journalists convention whether he thinks Kamala Harris was a DEI hire. My first guest lives and breathes DEI. Denise Hamilton is a nationally recognized diversity, equity, and inclusion leader who has worked with several Fortune 500 companies, including Meta, Apple, ExxonMobil, Amazon, the United Nations, and the WNBA. I had a chance to sit down and talk with her about DEI, what it means, and how it plays out. Denise, thank you for being a guest on our show today.
So glad to be here with you.
So let's begin with the obvious that is not so obvious. What is DEI and why DEI?
It's the question of the day, right? Because as often happens so many times, is we are allowed our language to be confounded, right? We have a phrase, a term. We saw it with critical race theory. We've seen it with woke. We've seen it with any term that tries to attempt to kind of advance the groups of marginalized people to level the playing field. It's going to be confounded because there's a benefit to us misunderstanding each other. I can give you what my definition of DEI is. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is the practice of creating opportunity to groups that may otherwise be locked out of opportunities because of structural, legal, or procedural policies. So it's not about me liking you or you liking me. It's about making sure that we are able to work together. And if I have a level of giftedness, my level of giftedness has the same opportunity as yours to be advanced, to be developed, and to be allowed to thrive.
So you're saying DEI goes back to abolition, women's suffrage, civil rights,
Absolutely.
affirmative action. I mean, the whole history of America in terms of trying to level the playing field for those who are marginalized. But there are those who say that we're living in post-racial America. And if that's true, then the narrative has changed and there's no longer a need for DEI or affirmative action. Are we living in post-racial America?
I don't think we're living in post-racial America, but I do think the story has changed. Right. And I think both things have a grain of truth in them. I think that what the challenges we currently face are different than what they were in 1850 and 1950. And we need to be specific in the targeting of the issues and the structural policies and procedures that create or maintain those policies from years gone back. So is the need for DEI different today? Yes. But is it gone? No. And I'm very, very clear on that. And I think it's really important that we're honest about where we have progressed. I hate it when people say, this is worse than the 1950s. Please stop saying stuff like that. That is not true. It is absolutely not true. And we do ourselves a disservice when we don't accurately say that, and express gratitude for how far we've come and how many challenges we've overcome. But I take that growth as a proof text that we have the capacity to grow even more and to be even more successful in creating an equal playing field for everyone to share their giftedness with the whole, right? I have a fundamental belief. If you say you love America, you're going to have to try to love Americans. Mm-hmm. And when we create a space where everyone's giftedness can be developed, we are stronger as a whole. And isn't that the goal? Like, that's the whole point, is that we're all stronger together. I have a recurring nightmare that the cure for cancer has already been born. It was just born in the wrong neighborhood. And that's why we don't have it, right? So we waste our own success, our own competitiveness as a country when we fail to develop everyone and to harness the gifts of everyone. So we talk about DEI very much in the terms of the marginalized, but very rarely do we talk about it as the benefit to the whole, right? We are better off because you are here, because I am here. Our country is better. And if we want that growth to continue, we have to address the policies that would stifle or suppress that growth in any way.
So what's the difference between equality and equity?
Hmm. You know, it I'm going to actually challenge even the question because I think where we are right now is um, we're a little bit bogged down in the terminology. I talk a lot about this in my book, in that I really work on simplifying my language as much as possible because it's like we're all talking past each other using terms that mean different things to different people, which is why I named my book Indivisible for that reason. Like the goal is for us to be able to be stronger together by fortifying the individual. So I could give you a million academic definitions of the difference between equity and equality. And then where would we be? Right? The challenge that we have is that we have hundreds of years of policies that have created a reality.
Hmm.
Now, as we move beyond, as our values have changed, as our thesis has changed about what it means to be American and what the value of each person is, we now have to figure out a way to unravel the damage of hundreds of years of policy, of codified policy, right? And so, what do we do to do that? And I think I always urge people that I work with and my cohort of other people who work in the DEI space to kind of get out of the definitional war and make sure we're focused on the main thing being the main thing. And the main thing is the best dancer should be able to dance. And do we have a structure that prohibits that in any way? Any place that there is an echo of the past that we need to disassemble so that the best and the brightest have a chance to shine, that's where we need to focus our energies.
1965, Senator Daniel P. Moynihan, a report on the state of the Black family, which was not good. But of course, the incentive was towards leveling the playing field. We had the uh, Civil Rights Act, 1964, the Voting Rights Act. But now we've got to do something to change the state of affairs with the Black family.
Yeah.
Called the Moynihan Report by two journalists. And it desired to say, we need equal opportunity. I get that.
Yeah.
We need equal access, because equal opportunity without equal access, what good is it?
Right.
But then we go a step further and say we need to produce equal outcome. I understand equal opportunity, I understand equal access, but when we start to control the outcome, is that fair? Is that equitable?
Well, I think the challenge is, what do you grade everything else by? Do you grade everything else by the outcome? If we had a food and drug policy of safety for our food and people were getting sick and dying every other day because it was ineffective, would we say, let's not grade it by the outcome, let's grade it by the intent or the structure? Like, I think there comes a point where we have to say, what are the metrics we're going to use to determine if we're being effective or if we have truly become post-racial, right? And we can disagree on that, but we definitely can't disagree on the fact that we need to have some metrics. And I think that there's a resistance to metrics. Like, I think we want to let our good intentions be enough. And when I think of my educational experience growing up in, a low income neighborhood in Brooklyn, New York, when I think about the experiences that I've had purchasing a home, when I think about the experiences that I've had pursuing higher education, I see the leftovers, the echoes of these policies that do create wildly different outcomes. So what you measure matters. So now, am I saying that we should codify some structure of unfairness to other people? No, but I think when you're fighting cancer, you don't talk about laryngitis. You talk about the cancer and you focus on it with a specificity and a clarity of intention. So I think what we need is clarity of intention, and then the metrics would be logical to follow.
You brought up two things. Number one, you use the word post-racial. Are we in post-racial America? Because if we are, then why DEI?
Yeah, I don't think we are in post-racial America. And I think there are so many incidents of it, whether it be Charlottesville, whether it be the murder of George Floyd, whether it be the ways that we still see vast disparity in who gets to attend the Ivy League or who gets the opportunities for higher education, period. The quality of our lower education, our prison population. We still have so many hangovers, so many echoes, so many leftovers from damaging policies of years and years and years. And I think we have to account for that. I think we have to figure out ways to move through it and beyond it. We love to declare a victory. And while I am the first to declare progress and to celebrate progress, I don't think we've reached a state where we can honestly say that the experiences of the same person with the same qualities, with the same skill set, if they're different races, that they have the same experience in America. And that to me is what it means to be post-racial. I don't personally believe that we're there yet.
There are those who would come back and say, well, wait a minute, you are now giving privilege to people of color at the expense of white people. Is
Well,
that what DEI does?
I don't think that's what DEI does. I mean, that's definitely not the brand of DEI that I work in. I mean, my strategy is to remove barriers. It's not to advantage any group over another group, right? If creating equality feels like oppression to you, then that's something that you have to examine for yourself, right? If I'm creating spaces where people who have not previously had an opportunity to participate or to excel, to just be in the game, if that is a threat, we have to examine what the game is that we're playing. The best example I could give is the recent spate of lawsuits against, like, the Fearless Fund. Perfect example. Here's this organization that's giving really low grants and investments to Black women who are trying to start up businesses. We hear as Americans, this is the hotbed of innovation and entrepreneurship, and these women want to participate. Now, the VCs, I think the number in 2022 was something like $242 billion was invested in startups. Less than 0.2%, not 2%, 0.2% of that money went to Black women. So this organization sets out to address that specific problem. We're going to help Black women to access these funds so that they have the opportunity to get in on the American dream, right? Because they're being locked out of that by virtue of not having investment. So they're sued under the idea that that is disadvantaging white startup founders.
Mm-hmm.
It couldn't be further from the truth. It's literally ridiculous on its face, because those other people have countless places to access funds, but this group has this tiny space to access funds. So that's a perfect example of people who are not negotiating in good faith. There's not a place that I can sue VC investors to say, why aren't you investing in Black women? Right? There's not a place that I can do that, but there's an opportunity for them to say, you're not allowed to help a group that has been completely locked out of this economic opportunity. Those are the places that I think we have opportunities to do better and to create opportunities when we have a historical framework that creates exclusion. And so I don't have any problem with an organization that's specifically targeting a specific problem. That's fine with me.
Has DEI been abused?
I'll respond to that in a complex way. I think DEI is nascent. I think it is an emerging industry that exploded after the murder of George Floyd.
Hmm.
I think a lot of mistakes were made in the rush to kind of participate. I do. I think we need to be honest about that. But I also think that the backlash against DEI is to be expected. Those of us who have been doing this work for years and years, we all called that this would be about 2 years, 3 years max, because societal change doesn't happen in months, it happens in decades, right?
Hmm.
And the reality is there was always going to be a backlash against anything that is moving the ball forward. In the book, I really talk a lot about my muse, who is Harriet Tubman. And she's a powerful, powerful example for me, because here is this woman who couldn't read, who couldn't write, who didn't have a horse, who didn't know anybody in the North, who had a disability, who had all these reasons that she should not have been able to run to her freedom, but she ran by herself and secured her freedom. Then she turns around and comes back. And I got to tell you, Pastor, I don't know if I would have come back, but she came back time and time again. And one time she would get 3 people, and next time she would get 5 people, and so on and so on. And there came a point, I believe it was the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, where the law was changed. Now they couldn't just get them across the Mason-Dixon line. They had to get all the way to Canada. I mean, think about that, from the South to Canada in the 1800s, right? They didn't throw their hands up and panic because there was a backlash to their efforts. They didn't give up. They didn't, throw the towel in. They just figured out how to get people to Canada. So the conditions have changed. The environments are going to change, but the work has to be consistent. And we need to have the commitment, the consistency, the character, and the courage to keep doing the work, even when people push back against it. No industry is perfect. And this is a profession that is developing and growing and becoming more formalized and becoming more clear. And as we do, the tactics will get better, the policies will get better, everything will get better with it over time. But I don't kill the baby in the crib because there are poor performers of the task,
Yeah.
right? Like we have to be very careful about that. We can argue all day long. I'm open to any discussion about how we can do this work better, right? But I really am cautious about people who don't want to do this work at all.
At all. Yeah.
At all. I can say, I got this cancer and I hate chemo. Chemo is terrible. Chemo has all these side effects. Chemo makes me feel sick, but you got to decide. You got to hate the cancer more than you hate the chemo.
Yeah.
And so I think that we have to double down and commit, just like Harriet did, getting those people to Canada.
So essentially, we can't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm in the UK. I am racially and religiously a minority within the United Kingdom. Am I experiencing the same problems, or is the issue that created DEI an American phenomenon, or is it global?
Oh, it's absolutely global. I think one of the most poignant examples is South Africa and the apartheid system, right? Like this idea of laws and structures that created exclusion and limited opportunity. There's no monopoly on this problem in the United States. I think, like South Africa, we just had a really clear structural system around it. But I think that's true of a lot of countries all over the world. And I think it's not about suffering and struggle. I think sometimes we anchor in that. But the truth of it is, it's really about opportunity and removing barriers. So that's a phenomenon that's experienced all over the world by so many different types of people. That's why this work is so important.
Yeah. And what does the future of this work look like?
Okay, let me get out my crystal ball. So, like I said earlier, I think the work has always happened. What we call it, who's in charge, who's at the tip of the spear may be different, but there will always be people who care deeply about creating opportunity for others and creating a space where people can bring their best themselves forward. So I think that there will be, many more lawsuits. We've seen so many companies kind of pull back from participating in this work for fear of lawsuits. There'll be many more what I see as last ditch, last gasp efforts to maintain the current status quo. But I think the reality of it is, it's like we talk a lot about voting right now, and nobody would be suppressing your vote if your vote didn't matter. People wouldn't be stopping and fighting these efforts if they weren't effective. And I can tell you, I have some really great news on that front. I've really observed some beautiful things on social media. And I don't get to say that often, but I've really observed some beautiful things on social media. When someone says something sexist or misogynist about a candidate, I'm seeing tons of people come in and say, hey, you can disagree with the positions, but you don't have to malign race or gender. When comments are made about a disabled young man, I'm seeing hundreds of people roll in and say, that's not appropriate. We don't handle people that way, right? So people are pushing back on DEI, but I see the fact that DEI is working. Even something as simple as the pronunciation of a candidate's name. I'm seeing people say, wait a minute, if you can say Tchaikovsky, if you can say Netanyahu, I bet you can say this person's name. I believe in you, right? So I think what we're seeing is an awakening. We're seeing DEI work. So that's why there's so much effort to dismantle it, is because it's effective. And I just want to encourage people that are committed and interested and have a belief in this work to just keep their hand on the plow. Keep their hand on the plow.
That's biblical. Keep your hand on the plow. So I will be predictive here. I will call it my prophetic imagination and say that, in fact, I'm going to guarantee it. You ready?
Yes.
Human nature will remain the same, which means we will have the same power struggles that we see now that create these inequities and inequalities. So I think you're going to be very busy doing DEI. How's that one?
I think you're right. I think you're right. There's a little factoid. Heather McGhee has a beautiful book called The Sum of Us. And she recounts that when integration happened, right? If you remember, I only have seen it from incredible movies that I've watched over the years, but all over the United States, there used to be these beautiful resort style swimming pools in a lot of communities. Beautiful, gorgeous pools, and everybody would go swimming all the time on a hot day, right? And when integration happened, rather than let Black people swim in the pools, the vast majority of those pools were filled in and paved over, right? And I always keep that story in the back of my head to remind me that as much as we have the best of intentions, that there are people who would rather fill the pool in than swim with us. And so human nature isn't going to change, but the world does change. It has changed, and we have the responsibility to continue that change. And I'm up for the challenge, Pastor. I'm here. I'm ready.
I love it. Change is not an event, it's a process, and we've got to keep the process moving. So if we want to know more about Denise Hamilton and her incredible book, where do we go?
You go to Indivisible Now. You can find out all the ways to purchase the book. I actually recorded the audiobook, which was so fun. And so people listen to it in the car, and then they call me and say, I had to go buy the hard copy too, because I needed to make notes. It is an owner's guide to America. And I think we need to be reminded of the possibility, I would say the pregnant possibility of this country and our responsibility for maintaining it and for taking it to the next level, for writing the next chapter. So I invite your feedback. Once you've had a chance to read it, reach out to me at official DHAM on all the social media places, all the places. And I love to talk to people who are interested in tackling problems rather than just naming them. So reach out.
Well, I will tell you, with your energy and passion behind it, it sounds like it's more than a book. It may be a movement.
We hope so. We hope so. From your lips to God's ears.
Amen to that. Denise, thank you for your personality. Thank you for being on the program. And thank you for the conversation. I appreciate your knowledge, your grasp of this, because that's very, very important that people know what they're talking about, but also your authenticity. Thank you for being real about this and being on the program.
Thank you so much. Thank you for covering the topic, because we need to talk about it more.
Yeah, absolutely. For the past few weeks, we've been delving into the presidential election and, of course, all the issues that will impact the United States and the world. My second guest today has been vocal on immigration, the country's divisiveness, navigating political correctness, and more. Joe Battaglia is the founder and president of Renaissance Communications, a media company with a mission to provide platforms for gifted communicators of biblical truth. He's also the executive producer and general manager of the nationally syndicated radio program, Keep the Faith, which is the #1 faith-based music radio show in the country. Additionally, he is the author of several books, including his latest edition, Make America Good Again, 12.5 biblical principles to unite our nation, restore true greatness, and reshape our political rhetoric. Rhetoric, is that? Yeah, it's rhetoric. Please welcome to the program, Joe Battaglia.
Well, Dr. Bernard, thank you for having me on the show today. Always good to be with you, as you know. So thank you again.
Let's fast forward. Let's move to the fact that the political climate has shifted with Joe Biden stepping down and Kamala Harris stepping in. She's reinvigorated the Democratic Party. Voters are now excited and rallying around her. So let me engage your prophetic imagination. Does she have enough to take it over the finish line? Or do you think that we're still in a place where the Trump era will continue?
Well, I mean, if I could be prophetic in that, I'd be on national television all the time with an answer. Some people are. Certainly, I think the reinvigoration of the party with the entry of Vice President Harris has certainly said something. And so you would hope that that would reinvigorate them. It would have to, coming after what Joe Biden went through. So I think it's much more of a horse race now than it was previously. Trump is his own worst enemy. I've always said that. His manner and expressiveness, I always said about him, and certainly we've grown up with him in New York. He is a New York City construction worker with a suit on, with apologies to the construction worker. And so, I mean, his appearance at the National Black Journalists Convention, from the moment he got on, all I could do is say, "What are you doing? What an opportunity to state what you believe with grace and dignity." And yet you pick a fight. And so those are the kinds of things that drive me crazy on either side when people do that. So, and I'm sure
if it's the end of the Trump era, let's say he loses and Kamala Harris wins. I mean, he's not going to be able to run again because 4 years he'll be in his, 83, 84 years old, whatever. And 8 years he'd be 88 years old. There's no way that he's going to run again if he loses. Do you think it would be the end of the Trump era in terms of its influence? Do you think the Republican Party will begin to reinvent itself apart from his influence?
I certainly think it would have to. I don't think there's any question about that. I think he'd be too tired at that point, and those of us would be too tired of him. And so, you know, new wine in new wineskin is not a bad idea. And I think the Republican Party needs a new wine. even now. Years ago, I could vote either way, and I have. I have voted for a Democrat for president. I have voted for a Republican for president. The disparity between the two was not that significant, really.
Yeah.
Today, it is so different. I mean, it's like worlds apart. And so the strategy of trying to get Kamala Harris to express what she really believes, obviously they meaning her handlers, have been very keen about keeping her off of extemporaneous discussions. It's really hard to know what she believes or what she is really saying. And then the argument of, well, look at what she has said previously, then that's the same thing that she'll believe now. I mean, normally that makes sense, right? Unless people have changed. But we don't know that.
Right. But don't you
So,
think that because she's vice president, she has to, navigate this carefully because she can't be at odds with who is still her boss, the president, and her vice presidential role is to serve, at the pleasure of the president and support the president. So if she comes out with too aggressive and clear a plan that may be in contradiction with some of the existing policies of her president, that could be a big problem for her.
well, obviously, I think all of us understand that she still is the vice president.
I wish all of us understood because some are not taking that under consideration.
Well, of course not, because it's not part of their narrative.
Yeah.
I mean, the reality is obviously they're going to paint her as part of the entire Biden problem
Mm-hmm.
and issue, which, seems to be logical for many people. The reality is the vice president has been basically a figurehead for the most part, and not someone that exercises a lot of influence. So the only way you can assess what she would really do is when she was in charge of something,
Mm-hmm.
which was back in her California days as Attorney General, correct? And prosecutor and so forth, prior to becoming a senator. And so that's the only way you can assess what she believes. So people then go back to that. And that's not a logical step. So she has to bear some of that burden, just as Trump has to bear his burden of how he may have acted previously.
In his past, yeah.
How else do we evaluate somebody unless we see what they have done?
Mm-hmm.
It's certainly a long way between this is what I say and this is what I believe, because I only believe what I do, not what I say. And so I think, the Trump position is certainly, how do I paint her with the same brush that is Joe Biden all 4 years and what she did previously? That is the only way that people are going to understand, what she may be like, and that becomes something negative on her behalf. That's why I think she has to do more talking in an extemporaneous fashion and outline positions that aren't just softballs thrown to her like the CNN interview, which was taped and edited. We'll see what happens in the debate next week. And so those are the things that you really look for. How are you on your feet? What policy do you have? And she doesn't do well, at least she hasn't done well on her feet extemporaneously. Trump, unfortunately, just resorts to a lot of his name calling, and I think that's just ridiculous. it's not like you're giving people their New York street names and they're the president of the United States. And I think that's a disrespectful position.
Yeah.
And I think scripture is very clear. And I think, as Trump often claims to be a believer, and those who have been with him, some of our evangelical friends attest to that fact. You know, the foot of the cross is the greatest level playing field of all time.
Yeah. I have a hard time with that, Joe. I just, they tried to moralize him, sanitize him, born again him, if I can, create a new term. He is who he is. And I would have preferred for them to simply say, and I'm speaking of these evangelical leaders, to simply say, look, this man, we believe, can push our social agenda. We believe that the policies that we want in place, he'll make it happen, as opposed to trying to make him, a saint, a Christian, in order to justify their support of it. I think they really messed up there.
I have a real problem with photo ops with our evangelical leaders in the Oval Office laying hands on him and praying.
Yeah.
I think that's part of what I said when you raise the flag higher than the cross.
Mm-hmm.
People get confused. So that's why some look at, the Christian nationalism term that is bandied about that a lot of people are afraid of. We haven't separated ourselves, from the ugliness enough to say to people, well, we don't believe in the ugly, we agree with the principles that he's espousing that follow biblical order.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're pro-life, I can buy that, right? If whatever the principle is, that's why we might endorse him. So anyway, you and I are very much alike on that.
Yeah, it is what it is. Yes. So let's wrap up the conversation. The future of media, especially faith-based media. What's your prophetic analysis and prediction?
Well, of course, I've been involved a lot in the faith-based movie side the last 20 years, doing all the national radio promotion for that. So I'm heavily ensconced in that area. And that's going to continue. I think when we see now Amazon partnering with John Irwin, who's made all these wonderful movies, like I Can Only Imagine, and movies like that, Jesus Revolution, right in back of me there, that poster that I had the pleasure of working on. I think when you see major companies like Amazon now partnering, because they have a series coming out in December called House of David, which is basically the prequel to The Chosen, right? So we see that I think that's going to do very well. Christian radio continues to do well on the music side. And so I think the Christian faith-based media will only get better and more mainstream from what I see. On the general market side, I think the reality of, which is disappointing, much of what we see in the media representatives, they have become ideologues rather than journalists.
Yeah.
And so an ideologue, well, you can't argue with that. And the idea is more important than the person. And that's the problem with an ideology. So you can disparage individuals and you can even terminate individuals with the extreme ideology that we saw, all through the 20th century with Nazi Germany and Soviet communist Russia and, the Red Scare in China with Mao and so forth. That's why millions and millions of people could be killed indiscriminately and summarily because the idea is more important than the person. And so we need to stand against that because biblically the person is ultimately more important because he's made in the image of God. And that is sacred.
Yeah.
And so anyway, I really would love to see our general market media become more like the journalists that they ought to be, which is accurate, which is more of my definition, rather than objective, and understanding that my definition of the journalist is who illumines what others cannot see. I would much rather have them, illuminating the things that are there rather than picking and choosing what they choose to expose.
Yeah.
So I think the faith-based media will continue to grow, but I don't think it's as ideological in its expression at this point. I think it's more about what does the gospel say and the presentation of good art in that sense, like in our movies and in our media, particularly radio that I'm most familiar with. So I see that more as what it should be rather than the general market side where it has gone. I hope it moves away from the ideological stand to becoming more of the let me talk objectively and accurately with logic and definition and honesty and so forth. So
you and I are wanting the same things. Does it sell? Will people tune in? We don't know, because that means we have to adjust the appetite of the public. Joe, it's been a wonderful time spending with you and to have this kind of conversation. Thank you for what you do in your field, and thank you for being proactive in trying to change the culture for good. And
thank you.
We'll continue conversations like this.
I know you will, and you
right.
should. So, and thank you for everything that you do. And thanks to everybody who is watching and listening to this for their attention as well.
Yeah. All right. So, Joe, where can people find out more about you and what you do?
They can personally, they can go to my website, joebattaglia.com,
Mm-hmm.
And they can read many of my op-eds that I have there and some of my talks and all my books. And then, with my company, Renaissance Communications, they can just go to ren.com, RENN. I made that up. Renaissance was too long. So, ren.com and joebattaglia.com. You'll find out as much as I want people to find out about me. Facebook, I have a Facebook site as well. So that'll do.
All right, that'll do. And thank you, because also, of course, you can find Joe's details in the description of this particular episode. Thank you, our listeners, for joining us today. And if you like what you heard, please subscribe, like, and share. You can find us on all podcast platforms. We'll be back with another great conversation right here on the A.R. Bernard Show. Joe, thank you so much, man. Appreciate your time. And again, apologies for all of the cancellations.